Well, drilling more deeply into what's happening with Iran, let's bring in Dan Hoffman, a former CIA station chief and a Fox News contributor. Dan, I want to start with what Harris and I were talking about, what we began talking about, which is whether or not what we're hearing from President Trump is meant to be confusing, is meant to be contradicting, to throw off the enemy. What do you think?
I think that'd be a great question to ask the president. I think we have been pretty clear about objectives to destroy Iran's defense industrial base, their drones, ballistic missiles, whatever's left of the nuclear program, the Navy. We've talked a lot about finding the roughly 1,000 pounds of enriched uranium so that Iran wouldn't have access to that to build a bomb. And now we've got the Strait of Hormuz. Right. So I think those things are pretty clear. How the president goes about doing that, yes, I think he's delivering mixed messages on purpose. He's giving Iran the chance to negotiate, which is something he's always done. At the same time, he's got the hammer ready if he needs it, with a U.S. troop presence over 15,000 and a new aircraft carrier, the George H.W. Bush. We have lots of military resources we can bring to the fight if we need to.
Well, you know, we had Newt Gingrich on yesterday and Aaron Cohen, both of whom talked about Trump warfare as being a very different kind of warfare than we're accustomed to. I mean, we're accustomed to seeing big action by the United States. This is different. We've had big action, no question, but no troops on the ground as of yet. And therefore, the propaganda, if you will, to use an old-fashioned term, is very important. We haven't seen it this important in a long time, particularly since we don't know exactly who we're talking to.
Yeah, I mean, we know that Iran hasn't capitulated. And we haven't seen the new supreme leader, so Mojtaba Khamenei. We don't know how severely injured he is. Yeah. And the Speaker of Parliament has taken a role in directing Iran's affairs. But at this point, they have not agreed to really negotiate with us in good faith. But the president's giving them every opportunity to do so. Now,
the president has said that the current people, and you mentioned the head of parliament, are more easy to negotiate with. They're not as hard line as the predecessors, most of whom are dead now. Do you agree with that? Because not everybody's on board with that assessment.
I think the evidence points to those who are in power right now in Iran are very much tied to the IRGC hardliners. But look, their actions will speak the loudest. They just launched more drone and missile attacks against the UAE today. They've still continued to impede travel through the Strait of Hormuz. We are negotiating, but indirectly in Pakistan with Iran. And I don't think there's any evidence that they're any more interested in negotiating in good faith than their predecessors. But time will tell, and there could be a lot of things happening behind the scenes. We just might not be seeing the evidence of anything publicly.
Well, the question, though, also is the president interested in a deal? Because he came out yesterday, I think we have the soundbite, I'll play it for you, suggesting that we really don't need a deal. Roll that tape.
Does Iran have to make a deal for the U.S. to end its operation in Iran? And have you spoken, and have you spoken directly?
Iran doesn't have to make a deal, no. Yeah, I've spoken to a lot of people. It's a new regime. They are much more accessible. No, they don't have to make a deal with me. When we feel that they are, for a long period of time, put into the Stone Ages and they won't be able to come up with a nuclear weapon, then we'll leave. Whether we have a deal or not, it's irrelevant. Now, it's possible that we'll have a deal because they want to make a deal. They want to make a deal more than I want to make a deal. But in a fairly short period of time, we'll be finished.
So is it possible that we could just walk away without a deal and bomb them when they try to rebuild their nuclear program or whatever we consider to be a threat to the free world?
Yeah, I think we'd like a long-term deal, and I think that was the point of putting our military assets in place before the war began so that we could have the leverage we needed to drive Iran to the bargaining table. If we don't have a deal, if we leave having destroyed Iran's defense industrial base, and hopefully we will have captured that uranium, enriched uranium, and taken it out of Iran, then we're facing a situation where, absent regime change or change in the regime's behavior, we may, as the Israelis like to say, have to return and mow the grass and dig up the weeds again in a year or two, once again to target Iran's weapons.
By the way,
and that's
very
just
quickly,
a fact that we're going to have to deal with.
During that time, if that's what happens, could we get the CIA and other intelligence operations involved with trying to develop a kind of an opposition? I know they're laying low because so many of them, tens of thousands of them, were killed by this horrible regime in the past month or so. But is it conceivable that we could help them in their efforts to build an opposition, sort of like we did in Eastern Europe during the Cold War?
Yeah, very difficult because the IRGC and the besieged paramilitary force have a pretty strong stranglehold grip on the population right now. They're the ones with the weapons. And if we were to support some sort of indigenous protest movement, they need weapons, and that would require us to have boots on the ground to vet the people we're giving the weapons to. I'm not saying it's not possible. It's certainly something the president could ask for. I'm quite sure the president is discussing that and a whole other range of options in terms of how we might arrive at some more permanent solution to this challenge.
Solidarity in Poland didn't have weapons. The opposition in Czechoslovakia didn't have weapons. It wasn't done so much by weapons, but by the power of the unions, of the workforce in those countries to rebel against what the government was doing. Because since the government was communist and they owned all of the workforce, when they went on strike, the government had to listen.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting comparison. I just think the Iranians are, historically, this regime, incredibly ruthless.
Yeah.
And they've made it clear that they're willing to kill tens of thousands of their own people. They've shut down the internet. This is 21st century denial of human rights, the likes of which we really haven't seen except for in North Korea and maybe Belarus, the Soviet theme park.
Yeah. Dan Hoffman, great to see you, Dan. Thank you so much for being